My bestie stole my fiancé. I married her dad and became her stepmom. Sounds like the plot of some trashy reality show, right? Except this isn't fiction. This is my life. And let me tell you, revenge doesn't just taste sweet. It tastes like expensive champagne at a wedding where your former best friend is forced to call you Mom. It wasn't supposed to end this way. Not with Amber. We had been inseparable since freshman year of college. Roommates who became ride or dies. The kind of friendship where you finish each other's sentences and know exactly which ice cream flavor to bring over after a bad date. She helped me pick out my first apartment, held my hair back during that disastrous tequila night, and was the first person I called when Ryan proposed. Ryan, even thinking his name sends this weird electric current through my chest. Not the loving kind anymore, more like the shock you get from walking across carpet in socks. Sharp, unexpected, lingering. We met at a friend's barbecue 3 years ago. He was charming in that unassuming way, not the loudest guy in the room, but the one with the best jokes. The one who remembered how you took your coffee. The one who called when he said he would. After a string of disappointing Tinder dates and situationships that went nowhere, Ryan felt like stepping into a warm bath after being caught in the rain. I introduced him to Amber 2 weeks after our first date. She hugged him, gave me a thumbs up behind his back and whispered, "He's hot." When he went to get drinks. Normal best friend behavior. Supportive. Encouraging. That's what makes betrayal so fucking devastating, you know? It's not just what they did. It's the foundation of trust they had to burn down to do it. The engagement happened last spring. Nothing flashy. Just us on a hike to our favorite overlook. The city spread out below us like a circuit board of lights. He had the ring in his pocket the whole time. Said later he was terrified it would fall out somewhere on the trail. I said yes before he even finished asking. Amber cried when I showed her the ring over FaceTime that night. Actually cried. Oscar-worthy performance, looking back on it. The first few months of being engaged were a blur of venue tours and Pinterest boards. Amber was my maid of honor, obviously. She came to every cake tasting, every dress appointment, always ready with opinions and suggestions, always taking pictures for wedding inspiration, always texting. I didn't see it then, how many of those texts weren't to me. The first splinter of doubt came 5 months before the wedding. Nothing dramatic. Just Ryan being unusually busy at work. Just Amber canceling our weekly lunch 3 times in a row. Just this feeling in my stomach like when you miss a step going downstairs. The walls of my carefully constructed life had hairline fractures forming, but I was too busy sending out save the dates to notice them spreading. Then came that day. Capital T, capital D. The day that divides my life into before and after. It was a Tuesday. Normal, boring Tuesday. I was supposed to be at a meeting with our wedding planner, but she canceled last minute. Thought I'd surprise Ryan with lunch at his office. He'd been working so hard lately, coming home exhausted, falling asleep on the couch before we could even talk about flower arrangements or seating charts. His assistant wasn't at her desk when I arrived. The door to his office was closed, but I could hear his laugh, that specific one he does when he's trying to keep quiet but can't help himself. My hand was on the doorknob before I even registered moving. The human mind is fascinating. In moments of extreme shock, it catalogs random details with perfect clarity, while the main event feels distant, like watching a movie through foggy glass. I remember Amber's red heel dangling off her foot as she sat perched on Ryan's desk. I remember the half-eaten salads in plastic containers. I remember thinking, absurdly, that his tie matched her dress. Was that intentional? Had they coordinated their outfits like some twisted couple? She saw me first. The smile slid off her face like wax melting. Ryan turned, and for one bizarre moment he looked annoyed at the interruption. Time compressed, expanded. Did something quantum. I didn't scream. Didn't throw things. My body went cold, like I'd been submerged in ice water. They both started talking at once. Explanations, apologies, my name repeated over and over like a broken record. I walked out. Simple as that. Walked out of the building, into my car, and drove straight home with the AC blasting despite being nearly frigid outside. My phone kept buzzing. I silenced it without looking. At home, I sat on the kitchen floor and stared at the refrigerator for what felt like hours. Our engagement photos held by magnets. His stupid protein shakes on the middle shelf. The post-it where he'd written, "Love you gorgeous." 3 days ago. My chest felt hollow. Like someone had scooped out everything inside and left just enough to keep me breathing. They both tried to explain. God, the audacity. Ryan showed up that night, eyes red, claiming it just happened. That phrase, "it just happened." Like infidelity is some kind of weather event, a tornado of betrayal that touched down with no warning. Like they had no agency, no choice, no moment where they could have said, "Wait, this is wrong." Amber called 27 times before showing up the next morning. I watched her through the peephole, mascara smeared beneath her eyes, shifting from foot to foot on my welcome mat, the one she'd helped me pick out. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't open the door. The next week passed in a fog of automatic responses and mechanical movements. I called off the wedding, sent a mass email that just said, "Wedding canceled. Details to follow." Never sent any details. Let people talk. Let them wonder. I didn't have the energy to craft a narrative that made me look less pathetic. My mom came and helped me box up Ryan's things, asked if I wanted to know what happened, if I wanted closure. I laughed until I cried, then cried until I was empty again. What closure? My fiancé and my best friend had been fucking behind my back for who knows how long. What magical combination of words could possibly close that wound? I found out later it had been going on for 4 months. 4 months. A third of our engagement. All those late nights at work, all those canceled lunches, all those wedding planning sessions where she looked me in the eye and asked if I was excited to marry the love of my life. The humiliation was almost worse than the betrayal. How many people knew? How many pitied glances had been cast my way when I wasn't looking? I deleted all social media apps from my phone. Couldn't bear to see their faces or worse, their attempts to continue life as normal. 2 weeks after that day, I got a text from Amber. "I know you hate me right now, but we need to talk. I never meant to hurt you. Never meant to hurt me." As if intent negates impact. As if shoving a knife into someone's back is somehow less painful if you feel bad about it afterward. I didn't respond. A month passed. Then 2. I went through the motions of living. Went to work. Came home. Ate something. Slept. Repeat. My apartment felt too big, too empty, yet simultaneously suffocating. Every corner held a memory I couldn't escape. During this time, something strange happened. The hollowness in my chest began to fill with something else. Not healing, something darker, more solid, like cooling lava hardening into rock. This new feeling had weight to it. Substance. Purpose. I started thinking about karma, about balance, about scales that needed adjusting. The thing about betrayal on this level is that it fundamentally changes you. The person I was, trusting, open-hearted, willing to believe the best about people, she died that Tuesday in Ryan's office. The woman who emerged from those ashes wasn't interested in forgiveness. She wanted the universe to balance its books. If this were a movie, I'd have some dramatic moment of clarity where I conceived my revenge plan all at once. Reality is messier. My path to revenge started with something small, almost inconsequential. I ran into Amber's dad, Robert, at the grocery store 3 months after that day. I'd met him several times over the years. Handsome for his age, successful real estate developer, divorced from Amber's mom for nearly a decade. He always had this quiet dignity about him, like someone comfortable in his own skin. Before, I'd seen him as nothing more than my best friend's father, just another peripheral character in my life. But that day in the produce section, weighing avocados with far too much concentration, I saw him differently. He looked up, recognized me, and his face did this complicated dance of emotions: surprise, sympathy, discomfort. He asked how I was doing with genuine concern in his voice. "Been better," I said, attempting a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "I heard about what happened," he replied, placing an avocado back in the display. "I'm sorry. That's not how I raised her." Something about the disappointment in his voice, the slight shake of his head, made that hardened lava in my chest shift, just slightly, a tectonic adjustment. "We should grab coffee sometime," I heard myself say. "Catch up." The words came out before I'd even processed thinking them, but as soon as they were spoken, as soon as I saw his eyebrows rise in mild surprise, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Interest. Curiosity. The faintest spark of possibility. "I'd like that," he said, pulling out his phone to exchange numbers. Walking to my car afterward, my heart was beating faster than it had in months. Not from love or attraction, from something far more primal. For the first time since that day, the fog had lifted. My mind was clear, sharp, focused. Coffee with Robert. Such an innocent suggestion. Such a simple first step. I didn't have a master plan yet. Didn't know exactly where this path would lead, but I understood with sudden crystal clarity that I had just placed my first piece on the board. Game on, Amber. Game fucking on. Coffee with Robert wasn't part of some grand revenge scheme, at least not at first. It was more like holding a match and suddenly noticing how many flammable things surrounded me. Possibilities, opportunities, the potential for a controlled burn. We met at this little cafe downtown, neutral territory where we were unlikely to run into anyone from our overlapping social circles. I arrived early, claimed a corner table, and watched him through the window as he approached. Distinguished silver at his temples, confident walk, the kind of man who aged like expensive whiskey rather than cheap beer. I'd made an effort that morning. Nothing obvious, just enough makeup to look alive again, hair actually styled instead of pulled back in the depression ponytail I'd been sporting for months. The woman in the mirror had looked almost like someone I recognized. "You look well," he said when he sat down, the lie so polite I almost appreciated it. "Liar," I replied with a half smile. "But thanks for the effort." He laughed, a genuine sound surprisingly similar to Amber's but deeper, with none of her affected girlish tones. The observation sent an uncomfortable ripple through me. I pushed it away. Our conversation started awkwardly. How do you chat casually with the father of the woman who destroyed your life? We stuck to safe topics. His business, thriving, my job, surviving, the unseasonably warm weather. Climate change is the great conversational fallback of our generation. Then, almost an hour in, after the pretense of normalcy had worn thin, he leaned forward slightly. "I want you to know," he said, eyes meeting mine with uncomfortable directness. "I think what they did was unconscionable." The word hung between us. Unconscionable. Such a formal, weighty term for "they fucked you over." "Have you talked to her about it?" I asked, stirring my third coffee, now cold. "I've tried." He shook his head. "Amber has always been difficult when confronted with her own mistakes. Gets that from her mother." The casual criticism of Amber caught me off guard. I'd expected paternal defense, not this. "She claims they're in love," he continued, his voice tinged with skepticism. "Says sometimes the heart wants what it wants." "The heart?" I repeated flatly. "Interesting choice of anatomy." He laughed again, louder this time, then looked almost guilty for doing so. "Sorry, that was inappropriate." "No, please." Laugh. Someone should find humor in this shit show. We fell into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm after that. There's something freeing about talking to someone who already knows your humiliation. No need to maintain facades. No energy wasted on pretending you're fine. When we finally left the cafe, almost 3 hours after arriving, he hugged me goodbye. A proper hug, warm and solid. The first human contact I'd allowed myself in months that wasn't from my mother or my sister. It felt steadying. "We should do this again," he said, and I found myself nodding before I'd fully processed the suggestion. Walking to my car, that earlier spark of possibility had grown. Still not a plan, not yet, but the outline of one, the shadow of something taking shape. I drove home with the windows down, cold air whipping through the car, feeling more awake than I had since that day. Our coffee meetings became regular. Weekly at first, then twice weekly. Robert was easy to talk to, attentive, thoughtful, with a dry wit that occasionally reminded me of Amber's before her humor had calcified into something meaner, more cutting. We carefully avoided discussing her and Ryan directly, circling the subject like explorers mapping the perimeter of a sinkhole, but her presence hung between us, unacknowledged yet undeniable. The reason for our unlikely friendship. The wound that connected us. I learned about his divorce from Amber's mom. She'd cheated. Apparently the apple didn't fall far from the tree. His passion for classic cars. His frustration with Amber's lifelong pattern of taking what didn't belong to her. When she was 8, he told me one afternoon, she stole another girl's ballet recital solo by convincing the teacher the other child didn't want it anymore. Pure fabrication. The other girl was devastated. "And what happened?" I asked. "Her mother rewarded her with ice cream for showing initiative," he said with a grimace. "I tried to instill consequences, but I only had her weekends after the divorce." These little stories, these glimpses into Amber's character, were both validating and disturbing. The betrayal wasn't an anomaly. It was part of a pattern, one I'd been too close to see clearly. It was during our 5th or 6th meeting that I first noticed Robert looking at me differently. Nothing inappropriate. He was too classy for that. But a slight softening around his eyes, a lingering glance, an attentiveness that went beyond friendly concern. For the first time, the vague notion that had been forming in my subconscious crystallized into something concrete. A plan, a path, a way to balance those scales. I began dressing more carefully for our meetings. Nothing obvious, subtle changes, a touch more feminine, hair down more often, perfume I'd stopped wearing after the breakup. Was it manipulative? Absolutely. Did I care? Not even a little bit. Here's the thing about being betrayed by the two people closest to you. It recalibrates your moral compass. North is no longer where it used to be. The needle spins, settles somewhere new, somewhere that points to survival rather than virtue. Robert invited me to dinner at his house a month and a half after our first coffee. A home-cooked meal, he said. Nothing fancy, just a change of scenery from our usual cafe. His house was exactly what you'd expect from a successful man in his 50s with good taste. Modern but not cold, expensive without being showy. The kind of place featured in architectural magazines where every object has been carefully considered. He cooked pasta from scratch, opened a bottle of ridiculously good red wine, and played jazz softly in the background. It felt like a date, though neither of us acknowledged it as such. After dinner, showing me his collection of vinyl records in the living room, he asked the question I'd been expecting. Does it bother you, being friends with me, given everything? I considered my answer carefully, swirling wine in my glass. At first, I thought it might, I admitted. But you're not her. You're nothing like her, actually. Thank God for small mercies, he said dryly. Besides, I continued, setting down my glass, I've missed having someone to talk to. The moment hung between us, charged with potential energy. He stepped closer, hesitant, questioning. I didn't move away. When he kissed me, it wasn't earth-shattering. No fireworks, no dramatic soundtrack. Just a gentle, tentative meeting of lips that ended almost as soon as it began. I'm sorry, he said immediately, stepping back. That was inappropriate. Was it? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from desire but from a sense of crossing a threshold. Of doors opening and closing simultaneously. You're half my age, he said, running a hand through his hair. You're my daughter's friend. Ex-friend, I corrected. And I'm 32, Robert. Hardly a child. He looked troubled, conflicted. The decent man wrestling with indecent thoughts. I knew I should feel guilty for putting him in this position, for the calculation behind my response. I searched for that guilt, and found only the cool, hard certainty that had been growing inside me since that day. We should take things slow, I said, giving him an out while simultaneously confirming there was something to take slowly. The relief in his eyes was almost touching. He nodded, grateful for the boundary, for the permission embedded within it. I left shortly after, both of us pretending the dynamic between us hadn't fundamentally shifted. In my car, I sat for a long moment before starting the engine, examining my own feelings with clinical detachment. Was I attracted to Robert? Objectively, yes. He was handsome, intelligent, kind. In another life, another timeline where I hadn't met him through Amber, perhaps something genuine could have developed. But that wasn't this timeline. In this one, every interaction was shadowed by purpose, by intent. The question wasn't whether I could develop feelings for him. The question was whether I could use his feelings for me to carve a path straight through Amber's life, to become the thing she couldn't ignore, couldn't dismiss, couldn't explain away with pretty justifications about hearts wanting what they want. The answer came with disturbing clarity. Yes. Yes, I could. Our relationship progressed with the careful deliberation of two people with too much to lose by rushing. More dinners, a weekend trip to a nearby wine country, kisses that gradually deepened, hands that lingered longer. I told no one. Not my sister, who would have been horrified. Not my mother, who would have been concerned. Not my friends, who would have had too many questions. Robert was similarly discreet. We became experts at compartmentalization, at creating a bubble where only we existed. The outside world, with its judgments and complications, remained at bay. 3 months into our relationship, I stayed the night for the first time. This moment, this intimate crossing, should have been accompanied by soul-searching and moral inventory. Instead, I felt only a calm determination as I followed him upstairs to his bedroom. He was a considerate lover, attentive, present. There was none of the performative quality that had sometimes characterized my intimacy with Ryan. With Robert, everything was deliberate, unhurried. He took his time as though we had all of it in the world. Afterward, lying in his bed, watching the play of streetlights through the blinds, I waited for regret or shame to find me. Neither appeared. In their place was only that steady, burning certainty. The knowledge that each step brought me closer to something inevitable. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "That I'm happy," I lied, turning to kiss him. The truth was more complicated, more jagged. I wasn't happy or sad. I was purposeful, focused. My emotions had been replaced by strategy, my heart by a chessboard. Our relationship fell into a rhythm. Weeknight dinners at his place or mine, weekends spent together. Careful planning to avoid public places where we might be seen by mutual connections. He began introducing me to parts of his life, friends who were distant enough from Amber's circle to be safe, colleagues who knew nothing of the complicated web connecting us. I played my role with precision. The younger, but not too young girlfriend, intelligent enough to engage with his peers, charming enough to make them understand his interest. 5 months in, during a rare moment of vulnerability, he confessed his feelings. "I'm in love with you," he said one Sunday morning, sunlight streaming through my bedroom windows. "I know it's complicated. I know the timing is unconventional. But I need you to know." I kissed him because words seemed insufficient, because speaking would require choosing between honesty and progress, because physical connection allowed for ambiguity that language didn't. "You don't have to say it back," he added when we separated. "I just wanted it said." The generosity of this, giving without expectation of return, sent a crack through my carefully constructed detachment. For the first time since embarking on this path, I felt a flicker of something genuine. Not love, not yet, but the possibility that it could exist. That in pursuing revenge, I might accidentally find something real. The thought was unsettling, dangerous. It threatened to complicate what had been clean, straightforward. I pushed it aside, refocused on the goal. I was too close now to allow doubt to interfere. 7 months into our relationship, Robert proposed. Not with grand gestures or public spectacle. He'd done that in his first marriage, he explained. This time he wanted something private, meaningful. He cooked the same pasta dish from our first dinner together, opened the same wine, played the same jazz records. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, the careful reconstruction of our beginning at what he saw as the start of our future. The ring was vintage Art Deco, elegant and understated. Nothing like the modern, Instagram-ready diamond Ryan had given me. This was a ring with history, with permanence. "I know it hasn't been long," he said, holding the open box between us. "But at my age, you stop measuring relationships in time and start measuring them in certainty. And I've never been more certain of anything." The moment stretched, suspended. In it, I saw multiple futures branching out like neural pathways. In one, I declined gently, ended the charade, walked away with my revenge incomplete but my conscience intact. In another, I accepted with honesty, admitted my initial motivations but confessed to the real feelings that had developed despite them. In a third, I continued as planned, accepting the proposal as another step toward my ultimate goal. "Yes," I said simply, extending my left hand. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, a perfect fit, he'd somehow gotten the size right, I felt a strange double vision. Part of me registered the genuine joy in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands, the unguarded emotion on his face. Another part calculated the next move, the announcement, the fallout. We decided to tell Amber together, face to face. No texts, no calls, no intermediaries. She deserved that much consideration, Robert insisted. I agreed, though for entirely different reasons. I wanted to see her face, needed to witness the moment when she understood what was happening. We invited her to dinner at Robert's house the following weekend. She accepted immediately, apparently excited for what she assumed was an opportunity to finally introduce Ryan to her father properly. Robert had been avoiding meeting him, making excuses whenever Amber suggested it. "She's bringing Ryan," he told me after confirming with her. "Is that going to be a problem?" I smiled, reached for his hand across the kitchen counter. "No, it's perfect actually." He looked relieved, missing the edge in my voice, the anticipation humming beneath my words. "You're remarkable, you know that? Most people wouldn't be able to handle this situation with such grace. If only he knew how little grace had to do with it." The night before our dinner with Amber and Ryan, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, rehearsing my expressions. The surprised delight when Amber arrived, the composed dignity when introducing myself as Robert's fiancé, the gracious understanding when absorbing her inevitable shock. A performance, yes, but one with truth at its core. Because beneath the calculation was a genuine desire to see justice served. To watch Amber confront the consequences of her actions in a way she couldn't dismiss or rationalize away. This wasn't just revenge. It was a rebalancing, a restoration of order to a universe that had allowed her to take and take without consequence. As I slipped into bed beside Robert, who was already half asleep, I felt a strange sense of calm. Tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow, the scales would finally begin to tip back. My last thought before drifting off was simple, almost pure in its clarity. Let her see how it feels. Let her understand what it means to have something precious taken by someone you trusted. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The day of the dinner arrived with that strange time warp quality that significant moments often have, dragging and racing simultaneously. I spent the morning in a state of focused calm, the eye of my own personal hurricane. Robert noticed my quietness, mistaking it for anxiety. "We can cancel if you're not ready," he offered, squeezing my shoulder as I stood at the kitchen counter, methodically slicing vegetables for the salad. I looked up at him, this man who had become both my shield and my sword, and felt that uncomfortable flicker of genuine affection again. "I'm ready," I assured him, just thinking about what to wear. This wasn't entirely a lie. I had given considerable thought to my outfit, landing on something that conveyed exactly the right message, a simple but expensive-looking emerald green dress that highlighted my recent weight loss. Turns out betrayal is quite the diet plan, subtle makeup that made me look both sophisticated and approachable. The kind of ensemble that said, "I've moved on, I've moved up, and I've never looked better." The ring on my finger caught the afternoon light as I arranged cheese on a platter. 3 carats of vintage perfection. I'd grown accustomed to its weight, the way it occasionally caught on my clothes, a beautiful shackle connecting me to a plan that had taken on momentum beyond my initial imagining. "They'll be here at 7, Robert said, checking his watch. "Should we open the wine now? Let it breathe?" His nervousness was endearing and irritating simultaneously. Endearing because it showed how much he cared about making this awkward situation as painless as possible. Irritating because his concern was primarily for Amber. His worry centered on her feelings, her adjustment, her acceptance. He hadn't quite grasped that her feelings were precisely what I was targeting. At 6:55, I was applying a final coat of lipstick when the doorbell rang. My stomach contracted, not with anxiety but with anticipation. Like an actor in the wings, waiting for the curtain to rise. I took one last look in the mirror, practiced my smile, not too tight, not too eager, and headed downstairs. Robert had already opened the door. I paused at the landing, taking in the tableau below. Amber's back to me, her blonde hair swept up in an elaborate knot that must have taken an hour to construct. Ryan beside her, a bottle of wine in one hand, the other resting at the small of her back in that possessive way men have when they want to signal ownership. Robert's face visible over Amber's shoulder, his expression a complex mixture of paternal love and discomfort. None of them had noticed me yet. I took advantage of the moment to steady my breathing, to prepare for the performance of a lifetime. "Dad, you didn't tell me you were cooking?" "I thought we'd order in like usual," Amber was saying, her voice carrying that slightly performative quality it always had around authority figures. The good daughter voice. I knew it well. "I've been practicing," Robert replied, his eyes flicking up to find me on the stairs. "Actually, we've been practicing." I descended then, each step deliberate, feeling 3 pairs of eyes track my movement. Amber turned first, confusion already gathering on her face. Then Ryan, his expression shifting from polite curiosity to shock as recognition hit. "Sorry I'm late coming down," I said, my voice remarkably steady. I was just finishing up. The silence that followed had texture. You could almost reach out and touch it, dense and heavy as wet clay. Amber recovered first, her socialite training kicking in despite her evident shock. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone hovering somewhere between confusion and accusation. I reached the bottom of the stairs and moved to stand beside Robert, close enough that our shoulders touched. He instinctively put his arm around my waist, a gesture so natural, so comfortable that I almost forgot it wasn't born of years of genuine intimacy. "I live here," I replied simply. "Part-time, anyway." Ryan looked like he'd been hit with a stun gun, his face frozen in an expression of disbelieving horror. His eyes darted between Robert and me, making connections that his brain seemed reluctant to process. "You ... live here? With my dad?" Amber's voice had climbed half an octave. "Why don't we all go to the living room?" Robert suggested, ever the diplomat. "I've opened some wine." The 4 of us moved through to the living room in an awkward procession, no one quite sure of the appropriate social protocol for this situation. It's not covered in etiquette books. How to serve drinks to your fiancé's ex-fiancé who cheated with your daughter who is now dating said ex-fiancé. Emily Post would have a stroke. I sat beside Robert on the sofa while Amber and Ryan took the chairs opposite. The coffee table between us might as well have been the Grand Canyon for all the distance it represented. Ryan still hadn't spoken, his eyes fixed on his shoes as though they contained the secrets of the universe. "So," Amber said, breaking the silence as Robert poured wine with slightly trembling hands, "how long has this been going on?" The way she said "this" made it sound like she'd found us engaged in some obscene act rather than sitting decorously on a sofa. "We reconnected a few months after everything happened," I replied, accepting a glass from Robert. "It started as friendship and evolved naturally from there." "Naturally?" she repeated, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "There's nothing natural about whatever this is." "Amber," Robert said, a warning in his tone, "be respectful." "Respectful?" She laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Dad, she's my age. She was my best friend. This is beyond inappropriate." "I'm actually 3 years older than you," I corrected mildly, taking a deliberate sip of wine. "And as for being your best friend? Well, we both know how that ended." Ryan finally looked up, his face ashen. "This is some kind of sick joke, right? Some twisted revenge thing?" His words hit closer to the mark than I would have liked, but I met his gaze with perfect composure. "Not everything is about you, Ryan. Sometimes people just connect." Robert placed his hand over mine, our fingers interlacing in a gesture that looked practiced because by now it was. "Actually, we have some news we wanted to share with you both in person." I felt Amber's eyes lock onto our joined hands, saw the exact moment she noticed the ring. Her face drained of color so completely I thought she might faint. "We're engaged," Robert said, his voice gentle but firm. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and inescapable. Ryan made a strangled noise somewhere between a laugh and a cough. Amber's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. "Engaged?" she finally managed. "You're joking." "This is a joke." "I assure you it's not," Robert replied. "How long?" she demanded, looking at me now with naked hostility. "He proposed last week," I said, angling my hand so the ring caught the light. "It was very romantic." "Not the proposal," she snapped. "How long have you been together?" "About 7 months," Robert answered. "We wanted to make sure it was serious before telling you." 7 months. I watched the calculation happen behind Amber's eyes, saw her counting backward, realizing that our relationship had begun while her affair with Ryan was still fresh news. "This is sick," she said, standing abruptly. "This is twisted and sick and clearly some sort of revenge plot." "Amber, sit down," Robert said, his tone carrying that paternal authority that still apparently held some power. Remarkably, she complied, though her body language screamed defiance. "This isn't about revenge," he continued. "We're adults who found connection during a difficult time. I understand this is a shock, but I expect you to treat my fiancé with respect." The word fiancé landed like a grenade, small but devastating. I watched Amber flinch, saw Ryan's hand clench around his untouched wine glass. "So what now?" Ryan finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "We all just pretend this isn't the most fucked up situation imaginable? Play happy families at Thanksgiving?" "Language," Robert admonished automatically, then seemed to realize the absurdity of focusing on profanity in the midst of this emotional minefield. "We're not expecting immediate acceptance," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Just basic civility while everyone adjusts." "Adjusts?" Amber repeated incredulously. "You want me to adjust to my ex-best friend becoming my stepmother? Are you insane?" I felt a thrill at hearing her say the word stepmother aloud. Until that moment, it had existed only in my mind, a tantalizing future state. Hearing Amber vocalize it made it real, made it inevitable. "The wedding is in 4 months," Robert said, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the mounting tension. "Small ceremony, close friends and family. We hope you'll both be there." "You cannot be serious," Amber said, looking at her father as though seeing him for the first time. "Dad, think about what you're doing. She's using you to get back at us." "That's enough," Robert said sharply. "You don't get to question my choices. Not after everything." The everything hung between them, loaded with meaning. I realized Robert had never fully forgiven Amber for her betrayal of me, had seen in it a reflection of her mother's infidelity, a genetic predisposition to dishonesty that had wounded him deeply. "Ryan, say something." Amber turned to him desperately. "Tell them how crazy this is." Ryan looked trapped, his eyes darting between Amber and me. I saw the exact moment he decided to take the path of least resistance. "It's unexpected," he said carefully. But they're adults. If they're happy? Happy? Amber's voice rose dangerously. She's not happy, she's calculated. Can't you see what's happening? She's doing this to punish us. I think we should eat before the food gets cold, I suggested calmly, standing and smoothing my dress. Robert's made his grandmother's lasagna recipe. It's delicious. The shift from emotional confrontation to mundane dinner talk was jarring, deliberately so. I moved toward the dining room without waiting for a response, feeling 3 sets of eyes on my back. The dinner itself was a masterclass in awkward social dynamics. Ryan ate mechanically, speaking only when directly addressed. Amber alternated between stony silence and pointed questions designed to expose what she was convinced was my manipulative scheme. "So, when exactly did you first realize you had feelings for my father?" she asked, stabbing a piece of lasagna as though it had personally offended her. "It wasn't a single moment," I replied, cutting my food with deliberate precision. "More of a gradual awareness." "How convenient," she muttered. "Amber, enough," Robert said wearily. "If you can't be civil, perhaps we should call it a night." "Oh, I'm being uncivil?" She laughed mirthlessly. "That's rich coming from the man who's sleeping with his daughter's ex-best friend." Ryan choked on his wine. I patted Robert's hand soothingly when I saw the flush of anger rising in his cheeks. "I think we should talk about the wedding," I said brightly, deliberately changing the subject. "We're thinking spring at that venue overlooking the bay. You know the one, Amber, where you always said you wanted to get married someday." It was a direct hit. Amber had indeed fantasized about that particular venue since college, had shown me pictures of it countless times, describing the perfect spring wedding she'd have there one day. Taking it for my own ceremony was perhaps the most pointed choice I'd made in this entire plan. The color drained from her face again, replaced immediately by a furious flush. "You absolute—" "They had a cancellation," Robert interrupted, unaware of the significance. "Lucky timing." "Lucky," Amber repeated flatly. "Sure." The rest of dinner passed in similar fashion, occasional landmines detonating amid stretches of tense silence. By the time I brought out dessert, tiramisu, Amber's favorite that I'd deliberately made slightly too bitter, the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. "We should probably head out," Ryan finally said, placing his napkin beside his barely touched dessert. "Early meeting tomorrow." "Of course." Robert nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Thank you for coming. I know this wasn't easy, but it means a lot that we could tell you in person." Amber stood without speaking, gathering her purse with jerky movements. At the door, she turned to her father. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice low and intense. "She doesn't love you. She's using you." "That's enough," Robert replied, his patience finally exhausted. "Call me when you're ready to apologize." The door closed behind them with a decisive click. In the sudden silence, I exhaled slowly, a tension I hadn't fully acknowledged leaving my body. "Well," Robert said, running a hand through his hair, "that went about as well as could be expected." I turned to him, saw the genuine distress in his eyes, and felt an unexpected pang of something, not quite guilt, more like recognition of collateral damage I hadn't fully calculated. "She'll come around?" I said, wrapping my arms around his waist and resting my head against his chest. "She just needs time." His heart beat steadily under my ear, trusting and true. For a moment, I allowed myself to enjoy the simple comfort of being held, of being connected to another human being who wanted me, who chose me. The fact that this comfort was built on a foundation of calculation didn't make it feel any less real in that moment. The weeks following our announcement unfolded with the chaotic energy of a Category 5 hurricane. Amber launched what could only be described as a scorched earth campaign against our relationship. She called Robert's friends, his business associates, distant family members, anyone who might listen to her version of events, which cast me as a manipulative social climber using her father for revenge. Some believed her, most didn't. Robert's position in the community, his reputation for integrity, provided a buffer against her most outlandish claims. The fact that Amber herself had been the original betrayer also undermined her moral authority considerably. Ryan, interestingly, kept his distance from the drama. He didn't defend me, but neither did he join Amber's crusade. When we ran into each other at a coffee shop downtown, he merely nodded politely and quickly left, his coffee order abandoned at the counter. I almost respected him for it. Almost. Wedding preparations continued amid the chaos. I threw myself into planning with a fervor that surprised even me. Each decision, from the venue to the flowers to the exact shade of ivory for my dress, felt like another brick in the foundation of my new life, my reconstructed identity. Robert worried about Amber's continued absence, her refusal to return his calls or respond to his messages. I soothed his concerns with gentle reassurances that she would eventually come around, that family bonds were stronger than temporary upset. I didn't believe this, of course. I knew Amber too well. Her grudges were eternal, her sense of victimhood impenetrable. She wouldn't come around, unless forced to by circumstances beyond her control. Creating those circumstances became my new focus. 3 months before the wedding, I orchestrated a meeting with Robert's mother, a formidable woman in her 70s who adored her son and tolerated her granddaughter. We met for lunch at her country club, just the two of us, ostensibly for wedding planning. Amber is struggling with our relationship, I confided after appropriate small talk had been exchanged. I understand, of course. It's unconventional. Amber has always been dramatic, she replied, cutting her chicken with surgical precision. She gets that from her mother. I worry about Robert, though, I continued, stirring my iced tea thoughtfully. He misses her. It breaks my heart to see him torn between his daughter and his future. What exactly are you suggesting, dear? She asked, her shrewd eyes assessing me with new interest. Nothing specific, I demurred. Just thinking aloud. Family should be together for important occasions, don't you think? Especially when the family isn't extensive. I knew Robert's mother would understand my meaning. His father was long deceased, his only brother lived abroad and rarely visited. Without Amber, the family side of our wedding would be sparse indeed. She nodded slowly, a glint of calculation in her eyes that reminded me, strangely, of my own reflection. I'll speak with her, she said finally. No promises, but I'll speak with her. I smiled, genuine gratitude mixing with satisfaction. That's all I can ask. Whatever she said to Amber worked. A week later, Robert received a terse text. I'll come to the wedding. Not for her, for you and Grandma. He was elated, showing me the message with such boyish delight that I felt another of those uncomfortable pangs. The genuine joy on his face at this small, grudging concession from his daughter made me realize how deeply her absence had wounded him. For a brief, unsettling moment, I wondered if I had miscalculated, if the collateral damage to Robert's relationship with Amber might eventually outweigh any satisfaction I derived from my revenge. The thought passed quickly. I was too committed now, too far along this path to reconsider. Besides, Amber was the architect of her own unhappiness. Her actions had set everything in motion. I was merely ensuring they had appropriate consequences. The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather, clear blue skies, gentle breeze, temperatures warm enough for the outdoor ceremony we'd planned, but not so hot as to be uncomfortable. The venue overlooking the bay was everything Amber had dreamed it would be, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the water as guests began to arrive. I watched from a window in the bridal suite as Amber and Ryan pulled up in his sleek black car. She wore a pale blue dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her hair and makeup flawless. From a distance, she looked composed, almost serene. Only someone who knew her as well as I did would recognize the tension in her shoulders, the slightly too tight grip on her clutch purse. Your stepdaughter has arrived, my sister commented dryly from behind me, where she was adjusting my veil. The term still sent a little thrill through me, a reminder of what this day really meant beyond the surface trappings of romance and commitment. Play nice, I admonished lightly, turning away from the window. I'm not the one marrying her father as revenge for her stealing my fiancé, she replied, raising an eyebrow. I froze, met her gaze in the mirror. We had never discussed my motivations directly, had maintained the polite fiction that my relationship with Robert was exactly what it appeared to be. That's not, I began. Save it, she interrupted, securing the last pin in my veil. I know you better than anyone. Just tell me one thing. I waited, heart suddenly racing. Are you going to hurt him? She asked, her expression uncharacteristically serious. Because revenge is one thing, but Robert seems like a decent man. The question hit deeper than I was prepared for. Was I going to hurt him? Undoubtedly, eventually. No relationship built on such a compromised foundation could last indefinitely. But would I do so deliberately, maliciously? The answer to that was less clear, even to me. I care about him, I said finally, which was true but not quite an answer. She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded once. Good enough, I guess. It's time. You ready? I took one last look in the mirror. My dress was simple but elegant, the antithesis of the elaborate princess gown I'd chosen for my wedding to Ryan. My hair was swept up, showing off the diamond earrings Robert had given me as an early wedding gift. I looked composed, confident, radiant even. Only I knew the hurricane of emotions beneath the surface, satisfaction mingled with uncertainty, triumph shadowed by unexpected attachment, revenge tempered by something dangerously close to genuine affection. "I'm ready," I said, and I was, ready to complete what I'd started. Ready to stand before Amber and say vows that would legally, irrevocably make me her stepmother. Ready to close this chapter of calculation and begin whatever came next. The ceremony went exactly as planned. Robert's eyes filled with tears when he saw me walking down the aisle. The officiant spoke eloquently about love and second chances. We exchanged rings with steady hands and clear voices. From my peripheral vision, I could see Amber in the second row, her face a rigid mask of composure. Ryan beside her, his expression unreadable. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, when Robert kissed me with genuine tenderness, I felt something shift inside me. A door closing on the person I had been, the woman driven by revenge and calculation. A window opening to what? I wasn't sure yet. At the reception, I danced with my new husband, accepted congratulations from guests, played the role of beaming bride with practiced ease. When it came time for family photos, Amber stood stiffly beside her father, maintaining a careful 6 inches of space between us, her smile not reaching her eyes. "One with just the ladies?" the photographer suggested, oblivious to the tension. "Mother and daughter." The words hung in the air like a live grenade. Amber's face went white, then red. "Stepdaughter," she corrected through clenched teeth, but moved into position beside me nonetheless. As the photographer adjusted his lens, I turned slightly toward her, my smile never faltering. "Smile for the camera, daughter," I whispered, low enough that only she could hear. "This is going on our Christmas cards." Her eyes met mine, a flash of genuine hatred visible before the camera clicked, capturing the moment forever. Her fury, my triumph, the new reality we both now inhabited. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of dancing, toasting, and carefully orchestrated joy. It wasn't until much later, in the quiet of our hotel suite, that the full weight of what I'd accomplished settled over me. I stood on the balcony overlooking the bay, still in my wedding dress, a glass of champagne in hand. Robert was inside on the phone with the front desk about a missing piece of luggage. I could hear the low murmur of his voice through the open door. The night air was cool against my skin, the stars bright overhead. Below, the last wedding guests were departing, headlights cutting through the darkness as they wound down the hillside road. I had done it, executed my plan with surgical precision. Amber would have to acknowledge me as family now, would see my name on legal documents, would receive Christmas cards signed Dad and Stepmom. Ryan would be reminded of what he lost every time they attended a family function, every holiday, every birthday celebration. It was complete, perfect. The scales balanced at last. So why did I feel this strange emptiness where satisfaction should be? This hollow space where triumph should reside? Behind me, the hotel room door closed as Robert finished his call. I heard his approach, felt his arms slide around my waist as he joined me on the balcony. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Harrison?" he asked, his breath warm against my neck. "Mrs. Harrison, Amber's last name. My name now. Just taking it all in," I replied, leaning back against him. "Happy?" he asked, and I heard the slight vulnerability beneath the question. I turned in his arms, studied his face, this man who had become so much more than a means to an end, whose presence in my life had shifted from calculated choice to something more complex, more real. "Yes," I said, and was surprised to realize it wasn't entirely a lie. "I'm happy." His smile in response was so genuine, so trusting, that I felt something crack inside me, a fissure in the careful shell I'd constructed around my emotions since that day. As he kissed me under the stars, as the waves crashed against the shore below us, I wondered if this was the true revenge after all, not just taking something from Amber, but finding something for myself in the process, something unexpected, something genuine. The thought was terrifying, and strangely exhilarating. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. What they don't tell you is what happens after you've cleared the plate. The honeymoon passed in a blur of turquoise waters, white sand, and spectacular sex. Because yes, despite the complicated beginnings of our relationship, that aspect had never been lacking. We returned, tanned, rested, and ready to begin our life as the new Mr. and Mrs. Harrison. Our first dinner as a married couple back in town was, ironically, at the same restaurant where Ryan had proposed to me 18 months earlier. A coincidence that Robert didn't know about, but one that felt like the universe winking at me, full circle and all that poetic bullshit. "I've been thinking," Robert said halfway through our entrees. "Maybe we should have Amber and Ryan over next weekend? Try to establish some normalcy." I took a slow sip of wine to hide my surprise. Normalcy. As if anything about this situation could ever be normal. "Do you think she's ready for that?" I asked, carefully neutral. "Probably not," he admitted with a sigh. "But the longer we wait, the harder it gets. She's my daughter. You're my wife. I need you both in my life." The genuine pain in his voice sparked that now familiar discomfort in my chest. The increasingly frequent reminder that my carefully constructed revenge plot had collateral damage I hadn't fully considered. "Invite them," I said, reaching for his hand across the table. "You're right. We should try." He looked relieved, grateful, trusting. It occurred to me, not for the first time, that I would eventually have to decide whether to be the woman he believed I was, or the one I'd been pretending to be. Amber agreed to dinner with surprising ease. Too much ease, actually. It immediately put me on high alert. One lesson I'd learned from years of friendship with her: when Amber acquiesced without a fight, she was planning something. They arrived exactly on time, a bottle of expensive champagne in hand. "To celebrate your return?" Amber said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ryan hung back, awkward and tense, barely meeting my gaze as they entered. Dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. Amber complimented everything with just enough emphasis to make it sound insulting. "This chicken is so interesting," and "I love how you've decorated the living room. It's very you." Robert, bless him, remained oblivious, so pathetically grateful for his daughter's presence that he missed the daggers beneath her words. I played along, matching her fake smile for fake smile, compliment for barbed compliment. It wasn't until Robert excused himself to take a business call that had been scheduled with his overseas partners that the masks dropped. "Nice performance," Amber said the moment the door closed behind him. "You've got him completely fooled." "I'm not performing anything," I replied, refilling my wine glass. "I'm actually happy." Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Maybe we should wait for Robert to come back before..." "Before what?" Amber interrupted. "Before discussing how his new wife manipulated him as revenge for what we did. He deserves to know the truth." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "And what truth is that exactly?" "That you targeted him. That this entire relationship is just an elaborate scheme to get back at us." Her voice rose slightly. "That you don't actually love him." I felt something shift inside me at her words, not guilt or shame, but something more complex. A realization that had been forming over months, crystallizing in this moment of confrontation. "When I first approached your father, yes, it was calculated," I admitted, watching her eyes widen at my unexpected honesty. "I wanted to hurt you like you hurt me. I wanted you to feel what it was like to have someone you trust take something precious." Ryan looked down at his plate, his discomfort palpable. "But here's the thing about spending months with someone," I continued. "About building a life with them, learning their habits, their fears, their dreams. Sometimes what starts as calculation becomes something real." "You expect me to believe you actually fell in love with my dad?" Amber scoffed. "Please, you're not that good an actress." I smiled, not the practiced one I'd been wearing all evening, but something genuine. "The funny thing about revenge, Amber, is that it changes you as much as it does the target. I'm not the same person who walked in on you and Ryan that day. Your father helped me remember who I was before the betrayal, before the pain." "This is bullshit," she hissed, but I noticed the uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "Think whatever you want," I shrugged. "But before you go running to your father with theories about my motivations, ask yourself this: what happens if you're wrong? What happens if I do love him and you destroy our relationship with your accusations? Can you live with hurting him that way?" The question landed exactly as intended. Despite everything, Amber did love her father. The thought of causing him pain, of being responsible for another disappointment, visibly rattled her. "You're manipulating me," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No, I'm asking you to consider the consequences of your actions." I leaned forward. "Something you might want to practice." Ryan, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. "She's right, Amber. We need to let this go. We did what we did. They did what they did. Continuing this, it doesn't help anyone." Amber stared at him, betrayal flashing across her face. You're taking her side? I'm not taking anyone's side, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm just tired. Aren't you tired? Of the anger, the plotting, the constant tension? I just want to move forward. His words hung in the air between us, unexpectedly resonant. I was tired. Revenge had been sustaining for a time, but it was also exhausting. The constant calculation, the performance, the monitoring of emotional cause and effect, it left little room for simply living. When Robert returned, the atmosphere had shifted subtly, not into warmth or acceptance, but into something like an uneasy truce. Amber was quieter, more thoughtful. Ryan more engaged, almost relieved. I found myself watching my husband, because that's what he was now, regardless of how we'd begun, with new eyes. They left earlier than planned, Amber claiming a headache. At the door she paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Make him happy, she said so quietly I almost missed it. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but something adjacent to both. A reluctant acknowledgement of a new reality. I intend to, I replied, equally soft. Later that night, lying beside Robert in the darkness, listening to his steady breathing, I contemplated the strange path that had led me here. How revenge, pursued with single-minded determination, had somehow morphed into something else entirely. Are you awake? He murmured, his hand finding mine under the covers. Just thinking, I whispered back. Good thoughts or bad thoughts? I turned to face him, this man who had begun as a pawn in my game and somehow became my partner. Complicated thoughts. He smiled sleepily. Those are the best kind. And he was right. The neat, simple narrative of my revenge had evolved into something messier, more nuanced, more real. The triumph I'd anticipated feeling had been replaced by something quieter but more substantial. Not the sugar rush high of vindication, but the steady sustenance of genuine connection. I'd set out to become Amber's stepmother as the ultimate power move. Somewhere along the way, I'd also become Robert's wife in more than name. The lines between performance and reality had blurred until I couldn't always tell where one ended and the other began. Maybe that was the true victory, not in destroying what Amber valued, but in rediscovering my own capacity for trust, for connection, for moving forward rather than being frozen in that moment of betrayal. I still didn't regret my actions. Still felt a flicker of satisfaction when I signed Christmas cards as Dad and Stepmom, or sat at the head of the table during family holidays, Amber forced to acknowledge me as part of her family. Small victories, petty perhaps, but satisfying nonetheless. But those moments no longer defined me, no longer sustained me. What I'd intended as an ending, the culmination of my revenge, had somehow become a beginning instead. A strange, unexpected second chance built on the ashes of betrayal. Life is funny that way. You think you're writing one story, only to find yourself living in another entirely. And sometimes, just sometimes, the new story turns out to be better than the one you'd planned.